Hey guys, like this light dark thing I've got going on? I did it for the gothic theme of my video. Just kidding. Today we're going to be talking about Nathaniel Hawthorne's Rappaccini's daughter. Hawthorne is the one that wrote the Scarlet Letter. I'm sure you've heard of him. Give me an A! It's going to be so much fun. Dun 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 dun! Don't judge. Rappaccini's daughter is primarily about an empiric scientist, Rappaccini, who will do anything to gain knowledge, including creating a highly poisonous garden. One such experiment led to his daughter Beatrice, the only really good person in the story, to become physically toxic. Meanwhile, this new guy, Giovanni, moves into town and becomes Beatrice's love, after creepily staring at her in her garden. They eventually hang out a few times, and Rappaccini makes Giovanni poisonous as well so that the couple can be together. But Giovanni gets so mad about being poisonous, he breaks Beatrice's heart. There's also this other scientist called Baglioni who uses the good old rules, aka the bad, useless ones, and generally just complains about the rivalry between himself and Rappaccini. Using his good old rules, Baglioni makes an quote-unquote antidote that kills Beatrice. So basically, her father makes her poisonous, Giovanni breaks her heart, and Baglioni kills her. This girl really can't catch a break. All the while, Hawthorne is desperately trying to make us think about Genesis and Eden. Before we get too far into that, though, let's take a look at the man. According to our class book, The Norton Anthology of American Literature, Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4, 1804 in Salem, Massachusetts. He is celebrated for his prose style, perception of New England history, and his vivid characterizations, especially of female characters. He was very private, and out of respect for his wishes, and as I am not particularly a fan of new criticism anyway, we're not going to go too far into his background for analysis. However, I do feel the need to divulge one aspect of his personal history. His prominent Puritan ancestors were among the first settlers of Massachusetts and included a judge in the Salem witchcraft trials. This heightened awareness of religion and its negative impact had a huge influence on Hawthorne's works. Let me reiterate. Huge. Economy-sized. Big. Or he could just be a guy with a funny mustache. Who really knows? Hawthorne wants us to make the connection between his story and the one found in Genesis. How do I know this? Textual evidence coming at you in 3, 2, 1. The location is very similar to the one found in Genesis. In fact, Joe Davis points out in his article The Myth of the Garden in the journal Studies in the Literary Imagination, which, is my first critical source. Check it. He says that the botanical creation of Dr. Rappaccini contains those elements and forms common to the Judeo-Christian creation myth. 1. The garden itself, 2. The waters flowing out of it, and 3. The shrub or tree at its center. Perhaps most obviously is the fact that Hawthorne asks, was this the garden then? The Eden of the present world? Was he, Rappaccini, the Adam? You really can't get any more obvious than that. According to M.D. Uroff, whose work was published in the journal 19th Century Fiction, my second source, despite the diversity and wealth of critical commentary on Rappaccini's daughter, the earliest interpretation of the tale as a polemic against science has remained curiously unchallenged. You know what? Challenge accepted. While I don't necessarily disagree with the wealth of critical commentary out there, Hawthorne lends himself to several interpretations, and I choose to take another. Essentially, I contend that Rappaccini's daughter is a Gothic retelling of the Adam and Eve creation story, one that uses science as a metaphor for religion, and that they are, in fact, interchangeable in this story. Hawthorne's overall moral is that humanity, in our quest for knowledge, should never forget that the purpose of that knowledge should be to help people. Once we lose sight of that goal, there is a negative impact on everyone. Everybody gets hurt. Here's a brief list of elements that Hawthorne took from Genesis and made extra Gothic for Rappaccini's daughter. The setting again makes an appearance. The garden in both stories is a place of isolation. For Adam and Eve, it was the home of the only people on earth. For Beatrice, it was a walled garden where she was described as the sister of a plant, half childish, and compared to a playmate of infancy. Essentially, where she was kept as innocent as the first people before the fall. Giovanni must go through several windy passageways to get to the garden, an addition to be sure, but a very Gothic one. The supernatural is another element of the Gothic and found in Genesis. B.T. Dubs, this painting has the scariest picture of a serpent I've ever seen. Moving on. Both stories have elements of the supernatural, most notably in the Tree of Knowledge in Genesis and the purple poisonous plant in Rappaccini's daughter. Both plants have the ability to give extraordinary power, which would be knowledge for Adam and Eve and the poisonous power to kill things in the latter. Both have the power of death on the people they infect. Beatrice leaves her garden in a literal death, Giovanni presumably continues to kill things with his breath, and Adam and Eve metaphorically die in their fall from grace. Next on the list is Gothic ambiguity, which is frustrating to some. Right here. Ambiguity is a common Gothic element. Half of the things I told you in the summary could be justifiably supported and challenged. Ain't nobody got time for that. One of the biggest problems in trying to make the case that Rappaccini's daughter is a Gothic retelling of the Adam and Eve creation story is identifying who is supposed to be who. Hawthorne purposely makes this difficult, presumably because people are complex and do not easily fit into categories. This is further complicated because there is a similar question in Genesis. Lori Lefkowitz from the Jewish Quarterly Review explains, in this first story, the ubiquitous God question, "Where are you?" resolves into, "What are you hiding?" a question that persists throughout biblical narrative and is actually a variation of the more existential question, "Who are you?" End quote. By golly, we're going to figure this out. Rappaccini is described as a snake because he doesn't care about the people he harms in his pursuit of knowledge. He brings danger into the world by creating poisonous plants and making poisonous people. He's also described as an Adam wandering around in the garden because he's the first man found therein. Hawthorne's language surrounding Rappaccini also makes the case that he could be representative of a Gothic version of God, especially when he is seen on 449 creepily observing the lovers and is, quote, satisfied with his success at creating two similar people. Giovanni is described in terms of equality with Beatrice. He's described as her brother and playmate. He could justifiably be called Adam, especially because he is Beatrice's romantic love interest. He is also sin personified, because he lusts after Beatrice before he even knows her by obsessing and staring at her. He has unjustified, uncontrollable, mortal rage towards her in the end on page 448, and he lets her sacrifice herself. Loser. As the only woman in the garden, Beatrice is undeniably Eve and closest to heaven in its virtues. She's put on a pedestal, important for Gothic literature, and described as a heavenly angel on page 447. Baglioni, not pictured, is easy. He's humanity personified. He wants to help but has the wrong tools because he's not an empiric scientist. He also lets envy get in the way of his good intentions. His intended cure causes Beatrice's death because its purpose was tainted with the sinful jealousy of her father. Whew. Why did I do a video? Okay. If Rappaccini is almost an Adam to Beatrice's Eve, and Giovanni is Beatrice's brother, this is starting to sound a little incesty. Don't worry, though. This is a common theme in Gothic literature. Hawthorne isn't just trying to be weird. Well, maybe. It's a little less weird when you consider that, according to Lefkowitz, Adam is both mother and husband to Eve. End quote. When you think about it, they were basically the same person. Twins, perhaps. Gothic element! Because Eve was created from Adam's rib. Whatever their relationship, Adam and Eve were very closely related, and this explains the strange, uncomfortable descriptions Hawthorne gives Rappaccini and Giovanni in relation to Beatrice. Also, God is omniscient, so he saw everything Adam and Eve did. Everything. This is significant because M.D. Uroff states that, both as a doctor and a father, Rappaccini is perverse. End quote. I mean, look at Giovanni and Rappaccini creeping up on Beatrice. And I guess she's being sisterly with the plant. Whatever. The Gothic tradition is full of inappropriate romances. Awkward. Moving right along. Hawthorne gives hints throughout the text that he's not wholly against knowledge or science. It is clear that it is the people that corrupt these concepts. It would also be good to note at this point that science and religion are synonymous in the story. Giovanni and Baglioni discuss Rappaccini's scientific methods in a key passage on 435. Giovanni asks, "And yet, worshipful professor, is it not a noble spirit? Are there many men capable of so spiritual a love of science?" Let's take a closer look. For these men, science is their religion, so it's easy for them to confuse the concepts. In fact, Hawthorne places keywords, religious words, next to scientific ones so that we, as readers, can understand their close relationship in this story. In these two sentences, worshipful, spirit, and spiritual all have a religious connotation. Following, professor, noble, to be explained in a minute, and science all have secular scientific connotations. The phrase worshipful professor indicates Giovanni's close association between science and religion. It is significant that Baglioni, a man of science, is described in religious terms. Noble, followed by an airy ethereal noun, is suggestive of the phrase noble gas, a very scientific term indeed. Here, instead, it is paired with the eternal essence of humanity. Spiritual, a reference to God's gift to man, is then juxtaposed with science, or what is presumably man's gift to man. Bam! Argue that. Hawthorne does this throughout the story too often to be accidental. The characters clearly think these concepts are closely related, and given Hawthorne's background as a descendant from the Salem witchcraft trials, it's safe to say that science taken too far in Rappaccini's daughter can be synonymous with religion taken too far. One last note, because we're running out of time. In reference to Rappaccini, Baglioni states he would sacrifice human life for the sake of adding so much as a grain of mustard seed to the great heap of his accumulated knowledge. The mustard seed, once a symbol of the power of faith in one of Jesus' stories, is turned on its head and now symbolizes dark, dangerous desires for knowledge. This is symbolic because science and religion can be something good and promising and hopeful, but taken too far with the wrong intentions, they can have disastrous results. Think of Baglioni's jealousy destroying Beatrice, or Rappaccini's quest for knowledge poisoning the people around him, or the Salem witchcraft trials. It wasn't religion's or science's fault that everyone got hurt in the end. So in summation, Rappaccini the God Snake lost his daughter experiment, Baglioni became a murderer, Giovanni is toxic and lost his Eve, and Beatrice died. That was cheerful. I hope you've enjoyed your time with me. Try to make it entertaining. Gothic element! Bye! Give me an A!